everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today's video is all about the Women's Prize for Fiction. Have I enjoyed the books that I've read from this prize in the past? And what were they? Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books. And tomorrow we have the event that a lot of us here on BookTube have been looking forward to for some time, the announcement of this year's long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction. And in honour of that, and also inspired by a couple of other things, I decided to make a video about my history with the prize. Have I read any of the books that have been shortlisted or longlisted, and what have I thought of them? So it's going to be a bit of a chatty video about books that I've enjoyed from the prize over the years, and this video was partly inspired by Shelly over at Shelly Swearingen. Shelly made a similar video talking about whether or not she likes the Women's Prize and whether or not she will be caught up in the hype of reading books from the Women's Prize long list this year. In the course of commenting on that video and speaking to Shelly, Shelly said she would really like to hear about my history with the prize, so I thought that that was a video I would like to make. And more than that, I wanted to explore whether I have read books that have been recognised by the Women's Prize in the past. If you are new here, the other inspiration for making this video today is that myself and two fellow booktubers, Charlie at Charlie Book Reads and Gemma at Gemma Books, have decided to host a sort of casual read-along in the coming months to celebrate the Women's Prize. So this read-along is going to be called the Plodalong. You can read as many or as few books from the Women's Prize list as you want to. And yeah, we encourage you to come and chat with us. We're going to be hosting reading plods rather than reading sprints because we like to read a little bit more slowly. We're going to be chatting throughout the months leading up to the announcement of the shortlist and then the announcement of the winner. If you would like to, please do check out our previous videos about this. Yes, without any further excitement and ado, let's talk about me and the Women's Prize. I have said in previous videos that I only actually became really interested in following the Women's Prize last year, and it was the first year that I was on BookTube during the sort of run up to the long list, and I didn't read everything from the long list last year. I read some books from it and I will talk about those in a bit, and I also then challenged myself to read the shortlist before the announcement of the winner. So going into this year, I really wanted to follow this prize again. I felt I'd got on much better with the books from the Women's Prize long list than I did with the Booker Prize long list later in the year. So this is the prize that I would ideally like to focus on this year, and I didn't actually know how many books I had read from the past lists that this prize has generated. This prize began in 1996, and it was very much a reaction to the Booker Prize, because in 1991 the Booker Prize shortlist had 0 books out of 6 were by women. And this was especially surprising because 60% of novels that year were actually written by women. So this discrepancy led to the creation of the Women's Prize. It usually produces a shortlist of 16 books, although in the past there have been some long lists comprised of 20 books. So I had a look at all of these lists, and of course from 1996 to present day there are over 400 books that have been longlisted for this prize. I have only read 26 of them. That includes all of the books that were longlisted, shortlisted or won the prize. That's not very many, so I would consider, probably after the Women's Prize this year, a new project for myself to try and read at least some of the winners from the past. And I must say that all of the books that I have read, I don't think I could say that any, apart from the ones I read last year, I read because of the prize. So prior to last year, really hadn't read very much at all. Out of the 27 winners there have been from 1996 until now, I have only read 2 winning books. I've also read 11 books that made it to the shortlist, and I've also read 13 books that made it onto past long lists. So what were they, and did I enjoy them? There have been 2 DNFs for me from books that I've read that were listed for the Women's Prize. One was on the long list in 2003, and that was The Cutting Room by Louise Welsh. I DNF'd that last year. I also DNF'd last year one of the shortlisted books, which was The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak. So yeah, there have been 2 DNFs as well, just for balance. I thought we would look at these in order from oldest to present day. Going into the second year of the prize, 1997, I have read one of the long-listed books, which was Anita and Me. This book is special for me because it was the first book I read that I can remember being excited about it being an adult book rather than a children's book, or YA, I guess, although we didn't call it YA in my day. Anita and Me was my first sort of adult contemporary fiction book, and this is by Mira Sayal. I think it's an excellent book, and it still holds a special place in my heart. It's very much a book about a friendship between Anita and the main character of this book, and I loved it, and I still love this book. I think it's a really excellent book about friendship and about like the meeting of different cultures. So yeah, very big soft spot for that book. So coming on to 1998, I have again read a book from the long list, which was Man or Mango by Lucy Ellmann. Now, I don't actually remember a thing about Man or Mango. Lucy Ellmann has later become much more famous for her book Ducks Newburyport, which I think was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and I don't plan to read it because it is a massive chunker, and I've not heard the best of things about it for my personal reading taste. But anyway, Man or Mango, I can't remember what Man or Mango is about. This was a book that I read in like the phase of my life where I didn't really get book recommendations, so I just used to go to my local library and pick up whatever took my fancy, and this was one of those books, and I'm afraid I couldn't tell you anything about it now, probably nearly 20 years later. So yeah, I have forgotten that one. One that I haven't forgotten was on the shortlist in the same year, 1998, and that is The Weight of Water by Anita Shreve. And it's definitely the one that made me want to read more by Anita Shreve, because this is a book that really did stay with me, and just has such an interesting plot to this one, which again, I am hazy on the details because I've read this book a very long time ago. From my feelings about it, I would recommend The Weight of Water. I can still remember the ending really hitting me very hard, so again, another book that I remember with a lot of fondness. Moving forward, I haven't read anything else from the list until 2003. From the long list, I read and loved The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. This is an incredibly sad tale about Susie Salmon, who is killed, and it's actually told from the point of view of the murdered girl as she watches over her family in the days after her death. So naturally that is a very hard-hitting book, but I would rate this book as one of my favourites of all time. It is so emotionally charged but so wonderfully written, I thought. And moving on to the shortlist of that year, another favourite book of all time is The Little Friend by Donna Tartt. I've read The Secret History and The Little Friend by Donna Tartt, and then not read any of Donna Tartt's later books, but I loved both The Secret History and The Little Friend, and I actually think in many ways The Little Friend is at least on a par with The Secret History, although it's a very different book, a much quieter book, a book about a girl. Again, I would be hard pushed to tell you like all of the details of this book because I read it a very long time ago, but it's certainly a book that I would consider to be a favourite of all time. Yeah, moving on into 2004, another long-listed book was The Time Traveller's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger. I know people have mixed feelings about this book, and some people love it, some people hate it. I was in the camp that love it, and I can remember with this book distinctly my mum saying to me, you have to read this book, it's absolutely brilliant. And I was like, The Time Traveller's Wife? Mum, this sounds awful. And I have never been more glad to be wrong about a book. It was just gripped me from beginning to end, and this is one I think that I would probably like to reread, but at the moment, without the benefit of a reread, I would consider this to be definitely in my top 20 books of all time. I really, really did love it. I seem to be saying that a lot. Moving forward to 2005, another long-listed book was Case Histories by Kate Atkinson. I've spoken about Kate Atkinson numerous times on my channel, and she is an author who I have never read a bad book by. This one was the first in her Jackson Brodie series, which are more crime fiction books, and this one contains a scene that literally ripped my heart out and I sobbed, and it's quite close to the beginning of the book, and I just found it unbearably emotional. I don't think I've ever read anything else that affected me in quite the same way as that scene in Case Histories, and I don't know if I would be able to reread that scene. Certainly I haven't plucked up the courage to do so yet, but that is just an example of Kate Atkinson's wonderful writing. In 2007 we have another book, Longlisted. This unfortunately is another one of the ones that I don't remember very well, which is What Was Lost by Catherine O'Flynn. I do remember that I read this. I couldn't tell you anything about it, unfortunately, so that is now at least 2 books that I have no recollection of. In 2008 we come to the first book I actually have on my stack here, and another favourite book, The End of Mr. White by Scarlett Thomas. This was longlisted again, and I love this book. It's super bizarre. It's about a book that someone finds in a second-hand shop. It's supposed to be a cursed book, and I enjoyed every single minute of this. I haven't enjoyed my time with some of Scarlett Thomas's other novels, but this one just brilliant. Absolutely loved this one, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that this was once on the long list. Next up, from 2010 and from the shortlist this time, we have Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. The first time I tried to read this was during the first lockdown in 2020, and I couldn't get into it. But the second time I attempted to read this after I joined BookTube, I couldn't believe I had missed out on this for so long. It's such a brilliant book. I think I liked the second one even more, but more on that in a moment. And I just think Mantel has written such a clever book, and the style of it is so unusual, and I think that was what was a barrier to me the first time. But the second time, knowing more what to expect, I really, really enjoyed this first part of the story of Thomas Cromwell in the reign of Henry VIII. So in 2013, I have read a book from the long list and a book from the short list. The long-listed book is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, and this book is very, very famous. I really, really enjoyed this thriller. I was surprised to see it on the shortlist of the Women's Prize because I felt like maybe I wouldn't see thrillers on there, but it's proved me wrong. I'm glad that there have been some thrillers on there in the past, and yeah, this is a really twisty one that I think most people have read, and it's definitely a book that I would put down as one that I hugely enjoyed while reading it. I've actually read 2 books from the shortlist of 2013, and they are both excellent. One is the previously mentioned second book in Hilary Mantel's series, Bring Up the Bodies. And yeah, I enjoyed this one even more than Wolf Hall, I think, because by the time I read this one I was really into the style. I really enjoyed this part of Thomas Cromwell's story, and I definitely need to get to the third part soon. Another wonderful book that featured on the shortlist. This one is possibly my favourite from the books we're talking about today, Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. This is, again, an all-time favourite book. I think I read this in 2020 and I absolutely loved it. This is the story of Ursula, who lives her life over and over again. She is born in a snowstorm in 1910. She dies in a snowstorm in 1910 sometimes. This is basically a book that looks at what if you had infinite chances to get your life right, if you kept dying and living again. And that's what's happening to Ursula I have never been more tense in my entire reading history than reading the section of this that is set in the Blitz in London. Just, oh, I was on the edge of my seat and so desperate for Ursula. This has been made into a BBC TV series that does not have a patch on the book, so if you enjoyed that series, please read Life After Life. It's well worth it. I love the way Kate Atkinson plays with the rules of novels in this book. Yeah, it's an absolute all-time favourite from the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist. Moving forward to 2015, we have another long-listed book, which was Station 11 by Emily St John Mandel. This is another book that I absolutely love, this time a dystopian post-apocalyptic type book that follows several characters years after the apocalypse and shortly after the apocalypse as well. I just thought Mandel did a wonderful job in this book, and again, probably if you asked me for a list of my top 20 favourites of all time, this would definitely be a contender for that list. So I am really surprised at the amount of my favourite books that I was seeing on these long lists and short lists when I looked them up. Going forward to 2019, I have read 2 books from the shortlist, which were My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite and The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. I read The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker before BookTube. This is a Greek retelling and in my opinion a really good one. This retells Achilles' story, but from the point of view of the women in surrounding him, and I just thought it was really well told and really well thought out. Very much enjoyed this book, and it was probably one of the first works of historical fiction, definitely the first ancient Greece retelling that I thought was brilliant. And My Sister, the Serial Killer, I listened to on audiobook, and this is an example of a book where I think that the way it was marketed to me didn't really do it any favours. I do think this was a really good book about sisters, a really good character study. However, I don't think that this is a thriller, and I felt it had been billed to me as such. A really good book, but not a favourite. So 2020 is the first year that I have read the winner from, and that is of course Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I've only actually got to this in the past year. It was one of my favourite books of last year, and I thought it was wonderful. This is such a moving portrait of grief. It draws on Shakespeare and his wife and his children, and I felt like this was an immersive experience rather than a book, and I think you would be hard pressed to find a better book from that year. So I can see 100% why this won the Women's Prize in 2020. So in 2021, I have now read 1 book from the long list, and that is Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. And this is another really good book, and one that I would recommend you check out my co-host Gemma's channel for. Gemma did a full review of this book, and I think she really captures what this book is about. I did enjoy the fact that I learned so much more about trans lives, and I thought that the complex relationships between the characters was really well done, and I think that this is a really excellent book, but it was not a favourite for me because I didn't like the ending. Coming forward to 2022, the year that I have actually read the shortlist, or most of it, and I read 2 books from the long list as well. One I read after it had not been shortlisted, and that was Salt Lick by Lulu Allison. I had really high hopes for this book because it was another sort of dystopian, although it was supposed to be only mildly dystopian, sort of post-apocalyptic book. Unfortunately, it was okay, but I've read many better books in this subgenre, so it wasn't a favourite for me. One that was an absolute favourite for me, and that will stay with me for a very long time to come, was Careless by Kirsty Capes. This for me was absolutely robbed of a place on the shortlist. I cannot understand why it didn't move forward because I loved it. This is the story of Bess, and Bess is 15 years old and discovers on page 1 that she is pregnant. And Bess is living in care, and this for me was a great insight into the care system in Britain in the early 2000s. And it was also a wonderful look at friendship. The friendship between Bess and Ishal in this book was my absolute favourite friendship in a book of last year. So yeah, highly enjoyed this one. As I've said, I did attempt to read the shortlist. I only DNF'd one, which was The Island of Missing Trees. So I also read The Sentence by Louise Erdrich, which I thought was a really good book with a lot going for it. I loved all the stuff about bookshops. I thought it was an excellent book, the best book I've read so far that is set during COVID times and follows like the events of the lockdowns in the US. There was a lot of food for thought in this book. It wasn't a favourite for me, which was a real shame because I loved the bookshop side of things and I thought it did some really great stuff. Another one that wasn't quite a favourite is only not quite a favourite because there is an event in this that is so horrific that I couldn't say I would ever be able to read that scene again, and that was The Bread the Devil Needs by Lisa Allen Agostini. I think this is a wonderful book looking at abuse, domestic abuse in particular, and child abuse, which was the part that I found extremely difficult to read. Overall, it was a book that I read very quickly, and although I wouldn't say I enjoyed it, I did think it was a really good book. Into the 2 books that I really loved from last year that were shortlisted. We have Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, which is the story of Martha and her mental illness and how that mental illness has contributed to the failure of her marriage. And Martha goes back and tells us all about her childhood, and although this sounds like a depressing book, it's actually very funny. I loved the family in this book and I loved the humour, especially around that family, and their family Christmases were just hilarious at times. I thought her sister in particular was a brilliant character, and I will definitely reread this book. Absolutely loved it. And speaking of books that I absolutely loved, another probable all-time favourite is Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. I think this is just an amazing book. I cannot understand why this did not win the Women's Prize. It's just so special. This is the book about Marion Graves, who attempts the Great Circle, flying around the entire world. And there's also a modern day storyline told by Hadley Baxter, an actress who is about to play Marion in a film of her life. And every single detail of this book is not wasted. Every detail is important, and I loved that. I thought this was a wonderful sweeping epic, and I think about this book pretty regularly still. I just think the characters, the setting, the sheer scope of this book were unforgettable. So I'm so glad I read this book for the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist. Finally, we come to the winner of last year's prize, which was The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki. This one's another book that I wouldn't say I loved, but I did really like, and I thought it was an excellent book. I thought this one took a little bit of time to get going and that it could perhaps have lost a few pages and that wouldn't have hurt it. But I did like the storyline, which is about a young boy who has lost his father, and objects start to speak to him. They make noise that is disruptive to him. The big problem with this is that his mother, who's the other lead character in this, is a bit of a hoarder, and her problems are getting worse, and this makes the house very difficult for Benny to live in, and he escapes to the library. I loved all the library elements of this. I loved the fact that some of it was told by a book as an unusual narrator, but it wasn't my favourite from the prize last year. As you can hear, there were several books that I thought were absolutely top books that I will love forever. This isn't one of those, but it's still an excellent, excellent book, and I can see why it was chosen to win the prize. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of everything I've ever read that has been on the Women's Prize for Fiction long lists, shortlists, and have won. Not that many in the scheme of things, but still quite a few to talk about. Overall, do I like books that I've read that have appeared on this list? I think it's very clear that I do. There are so many books here that I didn't read because they were on the Women's Prize. I read them because I came across them in other ways, but I loved them. And as I've said many times in this video, a lot of these are all-time favourite books. So you can't argue with that. That is a really high success rate for me reading the Women's Prize. And I feel like there's only a couple on this list that are sort of books I enjoyed but didn't love, and the rest are books that I've read such a long time ago that I just don't remember enough about them to comment. Will I read more books from the backlist of the Women's Prize for Fiction? Yes, I absolutely will. Last year brought me so many surprising books from the Women's Prize for Fiction, and that's why I'm looking forward to this year's long list so much. Will I read the entire long list? Who knows? I'm very much looking forward to tomorrow. Let me know if you are also highly anticipating the next list for this prize. Do let me know if you have any favourites from across the years of the Women's Prize for Fiction. I was really pleasantly surprised that although I've read relatively few books that have been nominated for this prize, I have loved pretty much all of the ones that I have read. So I'm definitely looking forward to hopefully more good surprises this year, and we will see how we get on. I definitely think that I need to read some more of the past winners. If you have any recommendations of past winners, past shortlisted books, or even past longlisted books, drop them in the comments down below so that I can read them, and I might even make them part of a future project. If you've enjoyed this video today, please do give it a like. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And as I've said, I would love to chat with you in the comments about all things Women's Prize for Fiction. That's all from me today, and I hope very much to see you all again soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.